Hello everyone, welcome to the Joget workshop, a live demo on Hashgraph Application Studio. My name is Penny and I'm a moderator for today's session. In this demo, with a focus on the healthcare team, we will showcase how you can visually build a decentralized application that interacts with the Hedera ecosystem all the way from generating Hedera accounts, sending transactions, and minting tokens, and at the same time, exploring the different opportunities for implementations in the healthcare sector. Before we begin, let's go over some housekeeping items. First of all, today's session will be recorded, and if you miss out any of our sessions today, no worries as you have the access to the recording later. And if you have any questions in between the session, do not hesitate to reach out to us via the chat or the Q&A button in the Zoom control panel, and we will get to it as many as we can at the end of the workshop. Moving on, you will also be directed to a feedback form after today's session, and as always, we are happy to hear about your workshop experience. Your opinions matter to us, and we would really appreciate it if you could take a moment and provide your feedback for an improved workshop to attend in the future. Last but not least, stay till the end with us for a series of video tutorials on how you can redeem your free Joget Academy voucher. And with that, today, we have Ed Marcus, the Developer Relations Engineer at Swiss Labs, and we have Justin Wee, the Special Projects Technology Manager at Joget. Ed and Justin, would you like to say hi to the audience?
Sounds great. Thank you, Penny. And hi, everyone. Ed Marcus here, joining from the Washington, D.C. metro area. I work in the developer relations team at Swirls Labs, which is the firm driving engineering and marketing initiatives for the Hedera network. And Hedera is simply a distributed ledger, also known as a blockchain, that is very unique in the sense that it exceeds the requirements that enterprises and startups have to be competitive in today's market. I'm happy to tell you more about that in a few minutes, but now I would love to hear from Justin.
Awesome, Ed. Hi, everyone. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm Justin. I am basically the technology manager from Joget. What I do, I oversee critical research and development projects that we are doing in Joget. And in this case, today we will be exploring the Hashgraph Application Studio, and I can't wait to show you the HAS Studio with a demo later on. So back to you, Penny. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Justin. So let's take a look at today's agenda. To start with, we will first have a quick introduction on Hedera and the Hashgraph Application Studio, followed by a live demo to walk you through the key features and capabilities and how you can get started on the Hashgraph Application Studio built on Joget. Without further ado, I will now pass it over to Ed to kickstart the session. Ed, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you again, Penny. All right. So my goal over the next 8 minutes or so is to give you an overview of the Hedera network and share with you why this network provides the trustless technology that we need for a trusted internet. So if we go back and think about the promise of Web3, and we also think about the evolution of distributed consensus, the promise of Web3 compared with previous iterations of the internet is that ability to have fair and trusted results at scale, right? Effectively removing trust assumptions. And that also means that we can have information and consensus that no single party can alter or control. And if we also look at that evolution, right, in the early stages of distributed consensus, the focus was mainly on fast value transfers, thanks to things like digital currencies and tokens. But we then realized that distributed ledgers enable transparent and traceable identification and ownership of assets, right? So things like land, devices, stock shares, music, fine arts, real estate, and a lot more. And then we saw smart contracts facilitating the execution of complex and trustless agreements between two parties or between two market participants. Now, things kept evolving and moving towards market scale. And that's where fair matching and settlement can actually happen for many, many market participants. Now, that all sounds great, but there have been and there still are some challenges with the technologies that are supposed to enable and facilitate this evolution, right? Early layer ones like Bitcoin and Ethereum have certain weaknesses or challenges that, get in the way of mass adoption. And so some of the challenges include huge energy usage. In the case of Bitcoin, early networks are also slow at processing transactions, so that throughput and scalability tends to be limited. There are high unpredictable costs associated with those transactions. Security is also a big concern, and also other concerns around the centralization and transparency of these early systems. Now, these are precisely the challenges that Hedera addresses. And Hedera addresses those challenges by basically meeting and exceeding the requirements that enterprises, startups, and small teams define for their solutions, right? There are some other newer networks as well in the market that tend to focus on some of these requirements, but not all of them. You have networks out there that may be really fast, but not secure or reliable at all, right? Other ones are secure, but not performant or even well-governed. And being a market leader or leading in all these different requirements actually demands a tremendous amount of work, a tremendous amount of thought, and also engineering innovation, right? And that is exactly where Hedera has focused. And so we've built a public distributed system that can meet requirements in the areas of performance, security, stability, governance, and sustainability. I'm not going to go through all of these points. I'm mainly going to highlight key points. But in terms of throughput and the ability to process transactions, we can process more than 10,000 transactions per second with finality in seconds. Also, we have the ability to deploy smart contracts. We focus very heavily on security. We have the highest degree of security that is mathematically possible, and that is asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerance. And we're also not a leader-based system, which has huge implications for minimizing downtime and maximizing the reliability of this system where you can build applications. Also, stability, we understand that is huge for enterprises and startups where these builders want to deploy on a network that is not going to be forking and where they can plan their costs, right? And in Hedera, transaction costs are pegged to the US dollar, so not pegged to the volatility of a token. Also, governance, we have a distributed governing council with parties that are staking the reputation to ensure the well-being of the network. And I'm going to go in more depth about that in a couple of slides. And then sustainability is a huge focus as well for Hedera. We actually have the lowest carbon footprint and energy usage per transaction compared to any public distributed ledger in the market. Now, for those of you that want to learn more about where the engineering innovation happens and how we deliver this to the market, we can look at this schematic here. Here's where a lot of the innovation and new inventions happened to make this network scalable, performant, green, secure, and everything. But we expose a lot of that innovation of this Hashgraph consensus algorithm through these services that are easy to use for developers via SDKs and APIs. So we have a service for consensus. You can think of this as a public notarizing or timestamping service that allows you to create immutable, traceable, verifiable logs. Maybe if you want to prove provenance or you want to show a dispute or settle a dispute with multiple parties. We also have a service for tokenizing items, whether it is a software license or a pair of shoes in your supply chain or carbon offsets and carbon credits or art. You can tokenize things on Hedera without the need to create a smart contract, right? You can do this with APIs and SDKs and tools that you may already know. So things like Java, JavaScript, Go, .NET, or Python. But if you're deep into the world of smart contracts and automating value exchanges, then you also have the ability to build those type of applications on Hedera. And so again, these are the services that application builders would use to create these applications in the areas of data integrity, tokenization, identity, supply chain payments, and a lot more. And that is ultimately how the end users benefit from this value that you creators are delivering, right? And those end users can be individuals, enterprises, governments, and even IoT devices. Now, I do want to talk about the governance because that is a very unique aspect of Hedera. Instead of being governed by 6 core developers or maybe the whales that have all the voting power in case of certain DAOs, what we have with Hedera is a decentralized council of global organizations, which includes enterprises and universities from around the world. They represent different industries from different geographies, and also diversified through time as there are term limits. So you have companies like Google, Boeing, IBM, Ubisoft, Dell Technologies, LG, and also universities and many more. Now, what does this council do? They make key network decisions. You can think of this as a representative democracy, right? If you have a complex procedure, you want to check with the experts. And certain decisions that they also make include features that are added and included in the network, policies related to governance, pricing of the transactions and APIs, and also certain decisions around token economics. Now, it is not only for enterprises, as I mentioned, we have many small teams, startups, and individuals building use cases on the network as well. And if we look at the adoption and growth of the network by the numbers, we're very happy with the growth that we have seen in the 3 to 4 years since opening up the network to the public. So we have over 20,000 developers, a very strong community attending events, hackathons, meetups, hundreds of applications now deployed in production. We're processing over 1,500 transactions each second, which surpasses the volume of any other distributed ledger out in the market. And to date, we've processed over 23 billion transactions to date. Now, these are all user-submitted and user-paid transactions. And we have seen more than 3 total million accounts on mainnet representing individuals, devices, and many more items. So that is the quick overview of the Hedera network, from the problem that we're addressing, how we're meeting requirements, the technology that we're delivering, and the journey that we've seen in the past few years. Now, I would love to pass it to Justin to talk more about the Application Studio.
All right, thank you very much, Ed. Okay, just give me a moment. I'll share my screen. Just let me know once you can see it. Okay, you should be able to see it now. All right, so thank you very much for the quick explanation about the Hedera ledger, Ed. So now, coming from the Hedera ledger, features like being cost-effective or carbon neutral, format, these are key features that most enterprises will be looking for when it comes to building out their own enterprise decentralized applications. Now, in combination with a no-code, low-code technology like Joget, and this is what we get: the Hashgraph Application Studio, combining both the benefits of no-code, low-code technology and fast and efficient ledger technologies like Hedera, and stowing it all together into a decentralized application. Now, of course, if you have come from a Joget background where you have developed Joget apps before, the experience in the Hashgraph Application Studio will not be any more different, right? But for anyone new within the audience here today, well, I'm sure that the experience will be very familiar to you in just a few more minutes. So, well, without further ado, without going too far on this, why not let's have a quick look at the Hashgraph Application Studio. Now, the Hashgraph Application Studio I have here, well, you can see it is running on my own local machine, but you have the option to deploy this on your own private cloud. You can deploy this on a virtual machine, anywhere you prefer. The basic consensus is if you can run Joget on whichever configuration, the Hashgraph Application Studio will be able to also. So when you first install the Hashgraph Application Studio, you're met with this first page of the App Center. Now, I've already logged in as the admin user. Now, if you need any quick guides or any quick references on how you use specific components, a sample app already exists here in the first place. And there's no need to do any other modifications. The necessary integrations and plugin packages are already bundled in by default. So let's get started. First, what will we be designing today? Now, with the theme of healthcare, well, let's tackle a really simple use case that we see in everyday life, which is prescription drugs, on how it's being issued to patients and how can we track it in a fair and immutable manner. So just to give a quick note for today's demo, due to the limited time, our demo will only concern about patient prescription. Of course, when it comes to drug issuance, there's many other steps and activities in between, but we'll just do the single phase of prescribing medicines to patients. And during the demo itself, we will see rapid shifting between designing the application and seeing the end user as is from a public user's perspective. So we are developing iteratively. We're not going to compile, wait. All you will see is you make changes, changes are applied instantly. And of course, later on, most of the time consumed in this demo is merely creating user screens and your business flows rather than having to figuring out the ledger tooling or codes, nothing like that. So there will be zero coding involved at all today. Okay, so since we've gone through this, well, the first step, we need to record the issuance of prescription drugs to patients. So we will be taking advantage of the Hedera consensus service today. So first, we will need to create a form or to create a topic specifically on a per pharmacy basis. And we're going to submit messages to it for every single purchase received to whichever customer or patient. Just a quick rundown on the Hedera consensus service. As Ed mentioned, it is basically a topic that you create, you submit messages to it, and they are all ordered within the timeframes that is being submitted, and they are immutable, forever living in the ledger's data that the public can pull up at any moment. So without further ado, let's get to our first step. So coming back to the Hashgraph Application Studio, we'll design a new app from scratch. Now from here, we can create a new app, or we can use any existing templates if we wish to, or if you have created your own custom templates, you can also create your apps from that template and get started quicker. But for this demo, we'll just start from scratch. Anyway, so from here, our app, we'll just call it a drug prescription app. And I'll do the same for the app name itself. And I'll click save. Now, by doing this, we have now been brought to the App Studio. So there is one step that we need to do as a prerequisite. Now, if you have not signed up an account on the Hedera tested portal, you need to do that first to get your operator account ID and keys. Now, for any non-technical persons here, well, just think of this as a service key or an API key to allow you to use a service like Hedera. So once you have copied your private key, you can come in here and set the plugin default properties for the backend configuration to work with the Hedera ledger. So with this, I'm going to search. And in here, we can find the default backend configurator. And in here, it asks us for a few details. So for example, I'm going to paste in the key that I've copied earlier and the account ID that I have. So for the backend service, we can just leave everything at defaults for now. And for the network type, do ensure that we are working with the testnet. Since we are using test funds here, we don't want to use any kind of real-world monetary value here. So once we have done this, we can just hit submit, and we are ready to continue building our app. So coming back to the builder, first we need to build the form of what a drug prescription issuing form would look like. So I'll add a form, and I'll need to give it a name. And for the name itself, I'll call this issuance. And for the table name itself, we can give any of our preferred naming convention in here as long as we can remember it and we can click Save. Okay, so now we've been brought to the form builder itself. To quickly describe it, we have all of our form elements on the left side. We have our canvas in the middle. It's as simple as dragging and dropping it into the canvas. So we'll get started first by giving the section here a meaningful name. We'll call this the issuance details. Okay, I hope I'm not making a typo there. Okay, so once we do that, well, we're going to need a few basic fields of who is our patient and what exactly they are purchasing. So first of all, we'll drag a few text fields in here. This will be the patient name. And of course, we'll accept the automatic suggestions within the identifier here. And of course, we also need to know when is this purchase being done. So we'll drag in the date picker, for example. I'll call this the date purchased. And maybe we'll need a few more elements, like, for example, is this a regular customer or is this a new patient? So we'll add a select box in here, and I'll call this new customer. Okay, new patient. All right, and we'll give it two selections in here. So whether it's a simple yes or a no, basically. So no or yes. And let's add a few more. So for example, a single patient, he can purchase multiple prescription drugs. So we'll need a grid of sorts. Of course, we have many grid elements available, such as advanced grids or form grids. But in the spirit of keeping it simple, I'll use a plain grid just for now. And I'll drag it in here and configure it. So for this one specific grid, I'll call this the drugs purchased. And we'll add a few more fields in here to give it some realism. So for example, what is the name of the drug? And what is the quantity that has been purchased? Okay, and that should do it for now. Two fields, just to keep it simple. Now, if we need to have some fields to be mandatory, so for example, the patient name must be filled in when the end user is keying in, we can also just edit this field, go to advanced options, and choose from various validators available. So for example, we'll pick the basic validator and make sure it's a mandatory field. Once we do that, we can see a red star that indicates that this is a mandatory field to fill in. Now, of course, the form itself, it's not just a static form. We can make it as a dynamic form also. So what I meant by that is when I change specific fields in here, how can I make it where the form responds and adds new sections on its own? So there are ways to do that. First, we can add another section here. Now, let's say if this is a new patient that we are serving, then we want to be able to record even more information about this new patient. So I'll make this a bit more clear. I'll just call this a new patient section. Okay. And let's say if this is indeed a new section, new patient, I'll need to know additional details like what is his address or what is his other details like age or his identification number and all sorts of stuff. So I'm just going to add an address text area in here, or maybe I'll add another one that says remark if there's any additional details that the pharmacy branch needs to know. So I'll call this remark. Okay, so once we have this new section in here, I want to make it respond to this specific select box. How do we do that? So to do this, I only need to come back in here, copy this single ID, and edit the section in here. Go to advanced options, and we will see the visibility control rules to allow us to control how this section responds to the overall form. So for the field ID, if new patient is yes, then this section below here will show up. And to quickly test this, we can also just click on preview and try it out. So if I click a new patient, there we go, our section pops up automatically. Now, how about a quick example of a quick integration? How do we do that? So let's say if we want to also know the patient's country, where is he originated from? We can also do that by using a select box in here. So I'm going to drag one very quickly. And in this select box in here, I'll call this country of origin. Okay. Now, of course, we're not going to be keying in hundreds of countries in here, so I will be taking advantage of data loaders. So from here, I have the option to also load data from a separate database. I can load it from another form or my own customized API. In this case, I can show a very quick example of this scenario. So I already have an API handy with me, luckily. So it's as simple to grasp as this: the country name is the name, country code is the code, straightforward. And with this, I can come back to my form builder and configure it accordingly. So for example, for selections, every select box options has their labels and their values. So in this case, the ID would be the country code and the label would be the country name itself. Now, once I've done this, let's just quickly see if it functions as expected. So once again, I'll make this of the preview. And there we go. Just like that, we already have a quick example of integration in here. Okay, so once our form has already been designed, I can go ahead and click Save. Okay, now not only that, I can also make use of the app generator function above here. And what this does is it helps me generate some commonly used components that we all find, such as CRED components to create, retrieve, update, delete, and an approval process that is based on a single step level approval that we can still modify later on anyway. So with this, I'll check both of these options and click Generate. All right, excellent. So once the generation has been completed, when I come back to my App Studio, you notice a couple elements has already been added automatically for me, such as the necessary forms, the list, the single step approval process, and the UI also has been generated automatically for me. So at this point in time, it is already ready for end users to see this app, how it looks like. So I can either launch the app from here, or I can go back to my App Center and I will find this app here for me to click on. And right here, once I click on it, we can see that for now, this is exactly how the app would look like for the end user themselves. And we have our CRED component here. We also have our single level approval over here for our drug issuance. Now, before we try anything here, let's add or incorporate some of the elements from the Hedera ledger, such as the Hedera consensus service, into our application. For example, when I'm issuing drugs to patients, how do I record every single receipt to the ledger, let's say to a topic, and track what is the patient purchasing from this specific branch, or how many patients are there, etc. So I'm going to go to my process and modify it. Okay, so for now, this is the single level approval process, but we can modify on top of it, just as an example. So for example, let's say if someone intends to purchase a specific prescription drug and it must go through an approval, and if it is approved, then we write it to the ledger. So let's make some quick modifications. So in here, in this tool, I'm going to piggyback on top of this and call this create topic, just to make it clear. All right. And for the mapping itself, I'm going to remove this and add my own component. So there are various components within the Hedera integration for the Hedera Application Studio, whether if it comes to minting tokens, burning tokens, scheduling transactions, and so on and so forth. But today, we will be making use of topics. So when we select the Hedera topic management tool, there are several things that we can do here, such as creating topics, updating, deleting, and submitting messages. So in this case, we will be creating a topic first. And for the admin key itself, we can leave it straight for the operator to handle, or we can even disable it completely. But do know that if you disable your topics, there will be no other way that you can modify it or delete it forever. So in this case, I'll leave things as default. Now, we also have the option to set a topic as a private topic. And what I meant by this is typically topics that we create on the Hedera ledger, they are public by default. So anyone can submit any messages to a topic if there's nothing else specified. But if you enable this option, we will have the option to generate a submit key where only people or personnel with this specific submit key can submit messages to our topic. So with that, I'm going to enable this option. Now for the topic memo, we can pretty much key in anything in here, whether if it's plain text or information coming from our own form, but we can just leave it as is for now. So we will need some workflow variables to store the topic ID in the submit key because we need these values to continue to submit messages. So what we meant by workflow variables is basically variables that is only tracked within the process instance that we are running. So as long as the value only lives from the start until the end of the process instance, it does not get out from this environment unless we specify it to. So with that said, I'm going to click edit. I'm going to add a couple more variables in here. So for example, the topic ID, we will be storing that, and also the submit key. Okay, so we'll apply the change and save the process first. Now, once we save the process, we can come back to our tool that we have and scroll down and select them accordingly. So the topic ID and the submit key in here. Now, of course, there are other details that we can also store about topics, such as the transaction validation status, the transaction ID, the transaction explorer URL to inspect this transaction later on. So we can add additional details after that. But for now, let's just continue on. So once we create a topic, we want to submit a message about our drug issuance. So in this case, I can drag in another tool in here. Okay, and this is the one that will be submitting messages to that specific topic. So I'm going to modify this tool and rename it accordingly. Submit new issuance. Okay, I'll rename it as such. And for the mapping itself, similarly, we will be selecting the same tool. And for this time, I will be submitting a message for the operation type. So with that said, in here, all it needs is the topic ID and the message that we intend to submit. And since we are using private topics, we can check this option that requires a submit key. So how do we fill in all these values in here? Well, there's no need to hard code them or type them in. We can make use of the property assistant in here to help us do the work. So with that, we can just use and dynamically retrieve a value anywhere we like. So for example, if I need the topic ID, I can just insert it in here and voila. So later on, it dynamically retrieves the value on runtime rather than having us hard coding it every single time. Similarly, that happens also for the submit key. So I will do it the same way. All right, so we have the topic ID, the submit key, and lastly, the message that we want to submit to our topic. So the message in here, it can be pretty much in any format we like, whether you want it to be in absolute plain text, a sentence, a JSON format, it doesn't matter. So with this, let's just reference our form. If let's say we want to record a few details, not necessarily the entire form, but just a few items such as the patient name and the date of purchase and all of the items that he has purchased, we can do that also. So with this, I'm going to write it in this specific format. So let's say the patient, it should be the patient name here. And we also want to record down the date of purchase. So I can also write it in this specific format. And lastly, we want to record the items that this patient has purchased. So I can just say items to keep it simple. And that should be the format that we are looking for. So how do we fill in these values dynamically? Similarly, also from the property assistant. So I'll use this, and rather than using a workflow variable, this time I can pull the value from the forms that I am filling in. So in this case, it's coming from drug issuance. Okay, I noticed a typo in here only, but let's just keep going on. And let's say the patient name, we'll have that. And next, I'll also need the date of purchase. So we're going to use the property assistant once again. Form, drug issuance, and date of purchase. And lastly, we want the list of items that has been purchased. So I'm going to pull that up also. Okay, form, it's coming from drug issuance and items. Sorry. Okay. All right. So that is pretty much all we need for the message in here. Now, we can also store additional details into the workflow variables to store transaction ID and those stuff. So let's also handle that after we save this specific process. Okay, so once we have done this, we can, well, very quickly test it out. So I'm going to go to my front end in here as a end user and quickly refresh. The changes that were made previously in the process builder has already been applied instantly, so there's no need to hit recompile or anything like that. So when I go to submit a new issuance, I can just key in all these details in here. So for example, the patient name, date of purchase, we can just key in the details in here. So am I a new patient? Sure, I can just click yes. Okay, so drugs purchase, I'm just going to key in any values in here for now. So quantity, let's say 5. Okay, so we'll check our select box. Yep, it is functioning just as intended. All right. So when I hit the submit button now, it goes to the inbox first, as we can see. Now, from this point, it requires an approval. So from here, if I were to select approved, then a transaction would be written to the Hedera ledger. So let's do that and go with the happy story. Okay. So I'll give it a few seconds for it to do its work. And there we go. So by right, a transaction should have already occurred. But since we did not record any of its transaction ID and any of the transaction URL that's automatically generated, it would have been difficult to pull up any of this for end users to reference them quickly. So if I were to go to the monitor, we can indeed see that it has indeed finished this process in here. We get to see an audit log of this and see that it has indeed submitted a new issuance, but we do not have such a data. But we can still see the topic ID. So for now, since we did not explicitly store this value, we can also inspect it on HashScan, one of the popularly used online ledger explorers. So if I were to go here and search for this specific topic, we should be able to see our data has been written to this topic, and this is the message that it has written in here. So we can see that it has indeed performed what it has intended to do. Now, with that said, how can we make some quality of life changes right now? So we have already successfully written a topic. Let's make some changes in here. So I'm going to come back to my App Studio. This time, I'm going to edit my form. Okay, and let's see if we can expose additional details such as the topic ID and every single transaction that it has written, right? So we can just do that by adding another new section in here. And for this, I'll make it quite clear. I'll say this is the transaction details. And since this is automatically filled in for us later on, I'm going to check both of these fields as read only, apply the change. Now with this, I can store some hidden fields in here that does not show up for end users. So for example, okay, maybe not hidden fields, I'll just use plain text fields just to make it clear. So in here, I'll drag in a few of it. And for this, let's say I want to show the topic ID. I can just do that. And secondly, if I need to show the transactions that has been performed, for example, the transaction for creating the topic, I can also store that value in here. Okay, and lastly, I need one more text field to show the transaction for writing such a message. So I can just do this, transaction. All right. So we have these three fields in here. I'll click Save for now. We'll use the process to help us store these values in. So I'll come back now to the App Studio, remembering that we have these three fields in here. And for this, I'll go to my process and modify the path for this specific instance. So we know we have created a topic, we have submitted a new message for every single drug prescription. Now let's add one more tool behind here to help us retrieve those values that we have stored. So I'm going to add a new tool in here, and then only I will end the process. For this I'll make use of a form update tool. So give me a moment. Right, data. For the mapping here, I will select the form update. There we go. So for this, I will write the data back into the issuance form, and there are a few fields that I would like to store. So with this, I want to store the topic ID there. I also want to store the transaction IDs for when I'm creating such a topic and submitting the message to the Hedera ledger. Okay, so for the topic ID in here, well, we already have that value in the workflow variable. So if we were to just search from here, we'll be able to pull it up. Like so, there we go. But however, we don't yet have the values for creating the topic and submitting the message. How do we do that? So with this, we will need to add additional workflow variables in here. So if I'm storing, for example, the transaction ID for creating the topic, and also storing another transaction ID when I am submitting a message to it. Okay, so I've added another two more workflow variables. Click Save. All right, and once I've saved it, I can just go to Write Data and add those two fields in here via the property assistant. So just give me a quick moment to do that. For that, create topic, very good. And lastly, for submitting the message. There we go. Excellent. Okay, so I'll just apply the change to this tool, and now I'll need this specific tool to write additional data from the workflow variables. So if you recall previously, when we configured the Hedera topic management tool, we can scroll down, and for the transaction ID, we have the option to now store this response into the workflow variable. So we'll do that. And we'll also store the submit message transaction ID also. So I'm going to scroll down and store this value. Of course, with your own option, you can also store the topic sequence, the topic hash, or any other data of such a transaction if you wish to do so. So I'm going to click Change, Apply Change, and click Save. All right, so at this point, let's try it again and see how it looks like when I submit another issuance. So this time with the patient name, I'm going to say a person named Penny here, for example, with the date purchased. Let's say it's not a new patient, and the drugs purchased. I'm just going to quickly key it in. And quantity, let's say 2. All right, so when I hit submit, of course, there will be not all the values in here will fill up immediately. So I'm going to click submit first and approve such an issuance. So I'll come back to my inbox, go to approval. Now at this point, I'm going to click approved, and let's see what happens. So I click complete and wait for a few seconds for the Application Studio to work its magic. And there we go. So once this has been completed, we can go back to our COD component to revisit these records. And when I click edit, there we go. Now we can see the topic ID and the transaction IDs that we want to track. Now, of course, we can just copy this into HashScan, but there's also an easier way around this. So let's modify it a little bit more to give our end users that convenience. So I'll come back to the App Studio, modify the form, and there is a component that we can make use of called the Hedera Explorer link. So when we scroll down, we can even include these custom buttons for us to help the end user to navigate directly to public ledger explorers. So for example, I can just configure it where if it's a transaction ID, we just need to mention what type of value we're expecting and fill in the field IDs in here. So for example, this is a topic ID type. So I can even change the button labels in here. So I can say verify topic on HashScan. Okay, and let's say I want to add another message, another button for these two transactions. So I can also do that, no problem. So I'll drag another one and another one. This one, I will just configure as such where it's a transaction. For creating a topic, I can just type in the button label as such to make it clearer. Verify transaction. And same goes to this button. Submit message. Verify transaction on Explorer. Okay, very good. So now we have all of our 3 buttons in here. I can save the form. Now, when I come back as the end user and refresh this page, we should be able to see our 3 buttons in here now. So with this, we can now click verify topic on HashScan, and it takes us directly there for us to see what we have written to the ledger. And if we want to see the transaction that created that topic, we can also click on it to see that this has indeed been done live. None of this has been pre-orchestrated beforehand. And we can also see the transaction that has submitted the message for this topic. So we can scroll down and see the message contents in here is as what we expected it to be. Okay, so we have gone through all of this exercise, and that's without writing a single line of code. And we are running close to the top of the hour. So I will hand the session back to Penny. I would have loved to show more, but we're running out of time, unfortunately. So I'll hand the session back to Penny for any questions that you may have for us. So back to you, Penny. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Justin and Ed, for the sharing. Let me put up my screen. So with that, I believe the audience now has a better understanding of the Hashgraph Application Studio and how you can now visually build dApps faster and easier with no code, no code. And so now let's move on to the Q&A and let's see what are the questions that the audience has for us. And in the meantime, we will also cover some FAQ, frequently asked questions, so that the audience will be able to get some insight from it. So the first questions that we have is, can you run Hashgraph App Studio on a Mac or is it just Linux or Windows? And is there any installation guide for it? Justin, what do you think?
All right, very good question. So the Hashgraph Application Studio is agnostic to the platform, whether you want to run it on a Mac machine or Linux or Windows. You can run them on all of them. So for example, I did run mine on a Mac machine. For the guides, you can even use the same exact guide from the Joget knowledge base itself, since both the Hashgraph Application Studio is built on top of Joget platform. Their guides would also apply similarly too. So good question.
Okay, thank you. So we have also prepared some FAQ today, and so I'm going to ask the first one. Can I mint and burn my tokens on mobile phone?
Okay, that's a good question. To clarify, I think what you mean is rather than constructing the transactions on your exact transaction on your mobile phone, you want to be able to use your mobile phone instead to create new transactions. Of course you can. So the Hashgraph Application Studio, although I did not show this, you can, all the UI that you created, the apps you create, they are mobile responsive by default. So if you shrink down the screen size, it conforms exactly to mobile, to tablet, and the apps in there that are also PWA ready or progressive web app ready, meaning you can install a Joget or a Hashgraph Application Studio app onto your mobile as if you are a native app on App Store. And what this means, you also gain capabilities like offline background synchronization. So if you were to submit any kind of approvals or forms offline, as you come back online, it will actually automatically send it out and create a transaction on the Hedera ledger. So something like that can definitely happen. So great question.
Okay. Since we talked about mobile responsive, does it come with offline support?
Well, short answer is yes. So features such as progressive web app ready, it is already available by default. There's no toggles or buttons to turn on anywhere. So your applications, they are already installable. You can even do that on your own Chrome browser, I believe, right? Chrome browser support PWA apps. There's an option for you to just install it directly into your own machine, and it behaves very closely like a native app. You don't see the controls of the browser. So good question.
Okay, thank you. And the next one, are we able to monitor the dApp performance in the Hashgraph Application Studio?
Come again? Are we able to?
Sorry, are we able to monitor the dApp performance in the Hashgraph App Studio?
Oh, okay. So short answer is yes. Okay, I can even show, I think I can just quickly share my screen again to show this, if you don't mind. Yeah,
Sure.
the one of you asked if you can check the performance. There is this feature available within the Hashgraph Application Studio called the APM. So when you go to your app studio, for example, and let's say your app is already deployed to production or testing, and you want to be able to evaluate its performance, you can go to your app studio, go down to the left bar in here, and you can inspect its performance metrics. It tells you all sorts of information like average times for each page within your app. And if you expand it, you get even more information like performance percentiles, 99 percentiles. And if there's any kind of service calls that you're performing, like for example, one of the APIs that I use to retrieve the list of countries, it even reports it in here and it tells you what is its average time. And many, many more, right? Like error traces, slow traces, so that you can click on it and you don't have to wonder if somewhere your app is slow, you know that there are potential for optimization whenever you check any of these metrics in here. So yeah, that's a fantastic question. Thank you, Penny.
Okay, thank you. And before I stop sharing, oh, you already stopped sharing.
Oh,
So,
okay, my bad.
yes, no problem. I was just wondering, how can we modify and customize the UI of the dApps? So let's say, for instance, there's company ABC, and instead of green, they would like to go with blue. So how can we do that?
Okay, another great question. So, well, I think in this case, red, I'll change from blue to green instead. Okay, so to change up the look and feel of our UI, the Hashgraph Application Studio is very flexible in that sense because of no-code, low-code technologies like Joget. It enables us to make all these flexible changes in here via the UI builder. So just a quick example, I'm going to go to my UI settings and I can change the theme. There are several themes that we can choose from. I'll try this one called the color admin theme. Let's say I'll change the color scheme to something more greenish. I think it's already green in here. And let's just see how it looks like right now. So if I were to click save and I were to come back to the front UI and refresh, you notice the entire look and feel has changed. So it's not just the button colors or just the line colors, nothing. It goes beyond that. It can even control micro components, like, for example, even the selectors of your calendar look and feel can change. So it really depends how much of customization you really need. Now, this is just the theme itself. If you want to make small little tweaks to go low code, let's say you want to add your own custom CSS to change something about this navigation bar, you could also just do that by scrolling down. You can key in your own custom CSS, your own custom animations, or you can even have your own organization logo, favicon. You can just upload them here and many, many more. So yeah, the level of customization here is plenty. Good question.
Thank you very much, Justin. And yes, before we move on to the resources section, Ed, do you have anything to share?
Thank you for that opportunity, Penny. I think what Justin has showed us today is phenomenal. How we can go in just a few minutes from a blank canvas to an application that you can test and ultimately you can take to production, and you don't even have to worry about dealing with the intricacies and nuances of understanding a blockchain or a distributed ledger. It's just phenomenal to see all of that abstracted away so that you can deploy that value and deliver that value more quickly to your users. But I loved seeing how the Hedera consensus service topics and messages were used in this context to create that immutable, traceable, and transparent log that would allow anyone to inspect, and anyone relevant to those transactions to inspect that history of drug issuance for this particular example. So I can only say how impressed I am with what Justin just shown and how easy he made it look. So that speaks a lot to the great work that he's done behind the scenes.
Thank you so much, Ed. I'm really flattered. Okay, back to you, Penny.
Thank you very much, Ed. All right, so let's go to the resources section. Let me pull up my screen. Okay, so that's it for the Q&A. And before we go, we'd like to share some of the resources that you will be able to make use of. So if you go over to our website, www.hashgraphappstudio.com, you will be able to find these step-by-step video tutorials that will walk you through how to generate a Hedera account, how to send a transaction, how to mint a token, burning a token, mint an NFT, and how you can create a simple token swap app. And if you'd like to learn more about the Joget platform and low-code technology, feel free to head over to the same website and submit a voucher request with the request code Hedera, and we will get back to you as soon as we receive your submissions. So seems that we have now come to the end of the session. Before we go, don't forget to fill up the feedback form directed to you after the workshop, as we would love to hear about your workshop experience. Thank you everyone, and we will see you in the next session.